Hello, and welcome to this series of vodcasts on Gordie Gillespie, who many of us believe was the greatest coach of all time. I hope that these conversations with players and friends of Gordie will help illuminate Gordie's greatness. But more importantly, I hope we can learn how Gordie did it. He was the winningest collegiate baseball coach of all time and the greatest Illinois high school football coach of all time. But we're not interested in his secrets of winning games, but his secrets of winning the hearts, minds, and the development of his young athletes. Today, we talk with Paul Babcock. Paul played baseball for Gordie in the 90s at St. Francis, and Paul figured prominently in the Fighting Saints National Championship in 1993, making what Gordie called the greatest catch in the history of baseball. Paul then became a teacher and a coach, devoting his life to passionately passing on the lifelong lessons Gordie taught him. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our podcast on Gordie Gillespie. And boy, it is my pleasure today to talk to Paul Babcock. And Paul has a very storied life, and a big part of that life is devoted to Gordie Gillespie, and we'll get into that. But Paul played for Gordie at St. Francis, most notably in 1993, which we'll get to, and I chronicle that in chapter 3 of the book. But Paul has his own book about that season. It's not just about that season, but it's called The Team. You can get it on Amazon and all kinds of other places, but it's an absolutely wonderful book. It's a heartwarming book about a young boy, so to speak, growing up on a farm, and now he dreamed to play baseball. And then we get to that 93 season. And Paul then became a teacher. He's been 27 years, he just told me, at Lincoln Way High School. So a teacher and a coach. So we'll get to an awful lot of that. And I'd love to start with going back to that 93 season. And essentially what happens is that Gordie Gillespie wins 3 straight national baseball crowns in the 70s, and then he leaves Lewis University to go to St. Francis. And St. Francis was this tiny school, and just years before, it was an all-women's college, and Gordie single-handedly turned it into one of the powerhouses in the nation. And he made the World Series a couple of times, but it was in 93 when he put this together. And Paul, if you would, also you could talk about the Southern trip, because I thought Tony Delgado, who was your assistant coach at the time, Gordie's your head coach, and they call you in the fall. Is that right? And they're going to have a meeting with you. So tell us what happened at that meeting.
Well, what's interesting is, Gordie's coaching football at St. Francis. So Del was in charge. And Del, when I talked to Del writing the book, he said, wait a second. It wasn't just me, it was the coaches together. He didn't want to be the bad guy, and Tony wasn't. But in my mind, it was his voice delivering the message. And to me, Tony wasn't a bad guy. He was just my motivation, is that, hey, Paul, you're never going to play. Because he knew that I could play on JV as a freshman and sophomore, but they didn't see my potential to play on varsity. And he basically said, hey, you're a really good kid. You're a fast guy. If you want to be our courtesy runner, you're more than welcome to stick with the team. You can run for our catcher, but really don't be under any delusion that you're ever going to play. And at first I took that as, all right, maybe I should just be the greatest base runner there ever was, work on that. And then I said, no, I'm going to pursue my dream. I'm going to work hard at my craft and everything I do, throwing from the outfield, fielding, hitting, of course. That was probably my biggest weakness. And I'm going to stick with it and see what happens. And my senior year, I actually came in to see Del, and I said, don't forget about me. And Del said, I get emotional about it because it was amazing how Del was rooting for me. Del and Gordie, all those guys. The reason he had that conversation with me is he wanted to give me the choice, that if I felt I was wasting my time, he felt I could go another direction. He wasn't trying to say, we don't want you to stay away. It was just like, hey, it's your choice. We understand if you don't want to be around, but don't be a detriment to the ball club, because you can know if you got a negative attitude, you're going to hurt the team. And I think that's one of the biggest qualities. The team that I played on, there were a lot more talented teams that St. Francis had. but there was something about the combination of us that made a difference. And we weren't the most talented group, but we were a team.
So when you became a coach, let me follow because I want to get back to the 93 season. But since you just raised that and you called your book, you entitled it The Team. One of the things that I have been struggling with in the years that it took me to write my book, and you are the quintessential example of what Gordie used to say, coach the kid at the end of the bench. And I identify with that, Paul, because when I went out for basketball my freshman year at Lewis with Gordie, we would do our drills and then he would split into a scrimmage. I was always one of the two guys who was sitting. So I was also literally, like you, the kid at the end of the bench. And yet he always pulled for those kids. And he pulled for you. And both Tony and Gordie told me about you and said, we were desperate to have him on the team. But as you said, they weren't sure that if you'd be a detriment to the team. But if you came with that unbridled enthusiasm you still have, they knew that you would be a great addition to the team. So when you started coaching, you obviously were thinking of that wonderful team that you had. Can you think of something that you did as a coach that you took from Gordie in order to get the players to love each other?
Well, you know what's true is I know I can only be Paul Babcock. I can't be Gordie. I can't be Coach Delgado. But honestly, everything I ever did was modeled on what those guys taught me. You know, it was the lessons that, you know, the dugout's cleaner than we found it. You know, how you win with, you were humble when you win, and when you lose, you keep your head up. You know, it's all those things. We're always about class, how you treat the other team. Hey, we're going to compete against you and give everything we have, but we're going to treat you with dignity and class. And I think those are things that once in a while are missing. You know, there's things that I think it's all right to fail, you know, as long as you learn from it and continue to move on from it and make yourself stronger. You know, if a win causes you to be complacent, it hasn't done you any good. If a loss causes you to grow, well, I'd rather have the loss. And those are little subtle things that I always tried to incorporate into what they were teaching me. I didn't feel like I was not being myself because I had to infuse my own personality, but I was always thinking about what I was taught. Today, we played flag football with my son, and he heard a little bit from me because he scored a touchdown and said something to the opponent. Well, there was consequences for that. And I brought up Gordie's name. I said, that is the biggest no-no there is. We always treat the opposition with class.
That's beautiful. Yes. All right. So let's get back to the 93 season. I'm sure we'll get back to your coaching also later because I really want to talk about your years. Anyway, let's get back to the 93 season. So you have this meeting and then you go through the fall season with Tony, and then your Southern trip takes place. Now talk to us about that Southern trip.
Well, we started off, I think, 3 losses right in a row. Maybe it was, I forget, I'm getting older now, but we had quite a few losses. So all the players get into a room, the captains, there are 4 seniors, Ivan Lawler, Paul Shavanik, Dan Samuelis, and myself. And we basically say, we were like the voice of Gordie. Gordie didn't need to call team meetings, but we basically say, hey, we're not that bad. Keep your head up, stay positive. We're playing teams that have been playing for a while. We're going to be just fine. If we can eliminate the mistakes we've been making, we're going to be fine. And the next day we didn't lose, but we did tie. But the end of the spring trip, we were 3-13-2. And behind closed doors, I guess Gordie said to his coaching staff, which we would never know. He said, let's face it, gentlemen, we're not that good. And it was just, we weren't executing. And when we came back, we got confident and we started playing well. We even won 27 in a row, which was an unbelievable streak. I was actually injured. I tore ligaments in my actually left hand. So I was back to running for the catcher, but it was better than missing my whole senior year. So eventually I got healthy just at the right time. I really didn't think I would play because if your team's playing really well, why would you change that? And there was just a few times I was fast and played good defense. So Gordie inserted me late in the ball game, and I did a few things well. And then I got another opportunity right as playoffs started, and that kind of led to the World Series. I don't know if you want to ask another question about that. I don't know how much you want me to go in about it or what.
I have a sort of a secret for you. I was just got off the phone a few days ago with Joan Gillespie, Gordy's darling bride. And that last day that you were down south, it snowed. It snowed in Alabama, believe it or not. Yeah. And so they had a meeting. They had a breakfast. So it was Gordie, Dell, and Joe Heinsohn was the pitching coach.
Right.
And Joan joined them because you couldn't play that day. And Tony remembers saying to Coach Gillespie, because Tony always calls him just Coach Gillespie, he's never Gordie. And he says, Coach, he says, this might be the best thing that happened to us, getting snowed out, because we're not going to lose another game. And Gordie said, we're just not a good team yet. But the key word was yet. And Joan said, Gordie, I think these guys are going to be great. They should be carping. They lost 13 games, and they should be yelling at each other. And they aren't. They're having fun. They're going to be fine. I said, Joan, you were the soothsayer. You predicted it. 27 straight wins. Absolutely incredible. Yeah. And then one thing during the season, if you remember, Gordie set the record of the most wins from the great Ron Dedeaux. Do you remember that game at all?
McKendree, absolutely. We swept them. It wasn't even close, either ball game. But Gordie wanted to move right on. You know, we got in line. We go to swarm him. No, get in line. That was like, why do you love Barry Sanders? You score a touchdown, you back like you've done it before. To Gordie, it was never about him. He did not. In fact, in my presentation that I give at clinics, I have a clip of Gordie that night. And really? what he says is, this is great. It's about the people, all these people, the kids I have in class, the girls on the softball team, the girls on the basketball team. It's about them. It's not about me. If I had all these wins and people hated me, and he goes, not that I'm running a popularity contest, verbatim, that's what he goes, but if the kids didn't love me, it'd break my heart. So it's always about who he was coaching. It wasn't about him. He didn't. And you know, this is a great time to say this. So in my presentation, I talk about how Gordie makes people feel. I went to visit Gordie after I'd graduated, went in, my youngest was about 3-4 years old, Mick. His name's Michael, but we call him Mick. We went in there and Mick, I actually goes, Gordie, are you napping? Because of course, it was Gordie's second tour at St. Francis and he was pretty old. So we like to give each other a whole hard time. And he's like, oh, I got to get Mick something. I got to give him a present. And Mick's playing with this rag ball. He's like, that's not enough. And he hands him this. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but it says, I think 2008 CCAC Coach of the Year.
Wow.
And I go, Gordie, Mick cannot have that. He's like, it's his bat. Don't hurt an old man's feelings. So, I mean, you know what it's like. Your kid, I mean, that he would give this to my son. He cares about people. He doesn't care about awards. And that was so powerful. He always had asked me, how's your mom and dad? He know Richard and Lorraine, how they doing? So it was a family. He was another dad. I had great parents. He was another dad.